I don't know what farm you crawled out of, but this is a Fortune 500 company.
With respect, I'm just here for the meeting your office scheduled, sir.
That doesn't mean every person who walks through my doors is worth my time.
I didn't ask for special treatment, sir. Just the meeting your office scheduled this morning and still hasn't found time for. Frankly, I'm surprised anyone even checked you in. One look at you should have been enough to know you weren't worth my time.
Garvey Williard smirked and crossed his arms while Emiliano Barsh tightened his grip on the folder but didn't flinch. What Williard didn't know was that the farmer he'd spent all morning humiliating controlled a $300 million supply contract his company couldn't survive without. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The drive from Trenton took 3.5 hours. Emiliano Barsh didn't mind. He'd been making it for 30 years, down the same stretch of Georgia highway, past the same pine trees and red clay fields, into the city that never quite felt like it belonged to him. He knew every curve of that road, every mile marker. He could drive it in his sleep. He pulled his Ford F-250 into the parking lot outside Nutricor Foods headquarters at 9:52 in the morning. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, looking up at the building through the windshield. It was tall, all glass and steel, catching the morning sun like it was trying to blind you on purpose. A giant logo, Nutricor Foods, in clean silver letters, was mounted above the entrance like a crown. Emiliano had helped build that crown, grain by grain. He climbed out of the truck slowly, the way a man does when his knees have seen 68 years of hard work. He straightened his overalls, clean, pressed that morning before the sun came up, and tucked his flannel shirt smooth. He picked up his worn leather folder from the passenger seat. Inside it was his contract. 30 years old, soft at the edges, every page intact. He set his straw hat on his head and walked toward the entrance. The lobby hit him with a wave of cold air. It was enormous. Marble floors, high ceilings, a waterfall feature along one wall that made a sound like constant, quiet money. Men and women in expensive suits moved through it like they owned the place, because they did. Emiliano walked to the front desk. A young woman looked up at him with a polite, practiced smile. "Good morning," Emiliano said. "My name is Emiliano Barsh. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Mr. Williard's office. Contract renewal meeting." The woman typed something, looked at her screen, typed again. "Of course, Mr. Barsh." Her smile didn't change. "Let me just call upstairs and let them know you're here. Go ahead and take a seat. Someone will be right down." "Thank you," Emiliano said. He settled into a leather sofa near the center of the lobby and set his folder on his knee. The seat was soft, too soft for a man used to wooden chairs and tractor seats. He sat up straight anyway. Around him, the lobby moved. A group of young executives crossed the floor laughing about something, badges swinging. A delivery man wheeled in boxes and was directed immediately to a side entrance. 2 women in heels walked past without looking up from their phones. Nobody looked at Emiliano. He didn't expect them to. He'd learned a long time ago that a black man in overalls in a place like this was either invisible or a problem. He intended to be neither. He intended to be exactly what he was. A man with an appointment, a contract, and 30 years of business that had made a lot of other people very comfortable. He opened his folder and reviewed the contract one more time. Not because he needed to. He knew every line of it by heart. He just liked the feeling of it in his hands. His father had negotiated the original terms back in 1994, sitting at their kitchen table in Trenton, Georgia, with nothing but a handshake, a prayer, and seed stock that had been in the Barsh family since before either man was born. Heritage grain. That's what Nutricor called it in their marketing. All-natural heritage blend. It was in 62% of their product line. It was the reason their packaging said farm fresh, and their stock stayed healthy, and their CEO got to work in a building that caught the sun like a crown. That grain came from Emiliano's land, his soil, his seed, his hands. He closed the folder. The clock above the reception desk read 10:14. The receptionist glanced at him once, offered a small nod, and looked back at her screen. Emiliano nodded back. He folded his hands in his lap, straightened his hat, and waited. Across the lobby, a man in a sharp, dark suit appeared from a hallway and spoke quietly to the receptionist. She pointed in Emiliano's direction. The man glanced over. Just a flicker, the way you glance at something that doesn't concern you, and then walked the other way. The waterfall kept running. The clock ticked to 10:21. Emiliano sat still. He had learned patience, the same place he learned everything else, out in the fields, where the only thing you could control was whether you showed up and did the work. The rest was weather. The rest was waiting. He was good at waiting. He just didn't know yet how much waiting this day still had in store for him. The coffee was lukewarm by the time Calvin Spraggs brought it over. He didn't announce himself, didn't make a production of it. He just appeared at Emiliano's side with a plain white cup and set it on the side table without a word. Then he straightened up and looked at Emiliano the way one man looks at another when he understands exactly what's happening and is ashamed he can't do more about it. Emiliano looked back at him the same way. "Thank you," Emiliano said quietly. Calvin gave one small nod and walked back to his post. That was all, but it was enough. 10:47 a.m. The receptionist made another call upstairs. Emiliano watched her lips move, watched her nod. She hung up and glanced over at him with that same practiced smile. "They're just finishing up something," she said. "It won't be much longer." "No problem," Emiliano said. He took a sip of the lukewarm coffee and looked out through the lobby's glass walls at the Atlanta skyline. The city glittered out there, sharp and clean and indifferent. 11:30 a.m. A new group of men came through the lobby. 6 of them, maybe 7. They were loud in the way that confident men are loud, not shouting, just taking up space, their laughter bouncing off the marble like they owned the echo too. In the middle of the group was Garvey Williard. Emiliano recognized him from the company's annual report. 54 years old. Silver-haired, square-jawed, the kind of man who looked like he'd been built specifically for the cover of a business magazine. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Emiliano's truck payment. He was saying something that made the men around him laugh again. A sharp, pleased sound. And he was moving through the lobby like a man who had never once been made to wait for anything. Then Garvey's eyes swept the lobby. They passed over Emiliano the way they passed over the waterfall and the reception desk and the potted plant by the elevator. A glance, a registration, nothing. He looked right at Emiliano, at the overalls, the straw hat, the worn folder on his knee, and he kept walking without breaking his smile. Emiliano watched him go. He didn't move, didn't shift in his seat, didn't let anything show on his face. But something went quiet inside him. A cold, still quiet. The kind that didn't come from anger. It came from recognition. He saw me, Emiliano thought, and I was nothing. Across the lobby, a woman in a blazer sat with a laptop open on her knees, a small notebook beside it. She'd been there since about 11. Emiliano had noticed her the way he noticed most things, quietly, without staring. She wasn't on her phone. She was watching. Her eyes moved from Emiliano to the direction Garvey had gone, and then back. Her pen moved. That was Helena Van Griff. Emiliano didn't know her name yet, didn't know what she did. He just noticed that she was paying attention in a room full of people who weren't. 12:30 p.m. The receptionist made a third call. This time she listened longer than before. When she hung up, she didn't look at Emiliano right away. She looked at her desk first. That told him everything. 1:15 p.m. The elevator opened, and a woman came out moving like she had somewhere more important to be. Sharp blazer, sharp heels, sharp expression. She crossed the lobby toward Emiliano and stopped in front of him, with her hands clasped and her eyes somewhere in the vicinity of his shoulder. "Mr. Barsh," she said, "I'm Sally Samford, Chief of Staff to Mr. Williard. I sincerely apologize for the delay." She didn't sound sincere. "Mr. Williard's schedule has shifted significantly today. We'd like to get you rescheduled at the earliest possible convenience." She pulled out her phone. "We're looking at availability in about 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, Emiliano repeated. "Yes, sir. I know that's not ideal. I drove 3.5 hours this morning," Emiliano said, "for a 10 o'clock appointment that your office scheduled." Sally's expression didn't change. "I completely understand. And again, we sincerely apologize for—" "Is Mr. Williard in the building right now?" A pause. Small, but real. "He has critical investor—" "Is he in the building?" Another pause. "Yes, but—" "Then please tell him Emiliano Barsh is still here." Emiliano's voice was calm. Flat and calm, like still water over bedrock. "Tell him I said he'll know what that means." Sally nodded with her professional smile and turned back toward the elevator. Emiliano watched her go. Then he picked up his cold coffee, finished it, and set the cup down. And he waited. 45 minutes passed. No one came down. No call from the receptionist, no update, no apology, just the lobby, the waterfall, the marble, the hum of a building that had forgotten he was in it. At 2:02 p.m., Emiliano Barsh stood up. He didn't do it out of anger. He didn't do it out of desperation. He stood up the way a man stands up when he has made a decision. Slow, deliberate, final. He picked up his leather folder. He set his straw hat straight on his head. He looked once at the receptionist, who was typing and not looking back, and then he turned away from the exit. He walked toward the elevator. Calvin Spraggs saw it happen from his post at the security desk. His job, his actual written-down job, was to stop unauthorized visitors from accessing the upper floors. He was supposed to ask for a badge, supposed to call upstairs for confirmation, supposed to follow the protocol that Nutricore Foods had printed in a binder somewhere on a shelf in the security office. Calvin watched Emiliano walk toward the elevator with his folder under his arm and his hat on straight. He stepped aside. 32nd floor, sir, Calvin said quietly. The big conference room. Emiliano didn't stop walking, but he nodded once, a small, dignified nod, and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped in. The doors closed behind him. Calvin went back to his desk and stared at the security binder like he'd never seen it before in his life. The elevator was all mirrors and chrome. Emiliano could see himself from every angle. The overalls, the flannel, the worn folder, the straw hat. He looked like what he was. A farmer. A man who worked land and grew things and kept his word. He looked nothing like the people in this building. He kept his eyes forward and watched the numbers climb. The doors opened on 32. The executive floor was a different world. Quieter. The carpet was thick enough that you couldn't hear your own footsteps. The walls were lined with framed product campaigns, smiling families, golden fields, the words All Natural Heritage Blend in clean font above photographs of grain that Emiliano recognized because he had grown it himself. He stood in front of one of those photographs for just a moment. His grain, his fields, his family's seed stock. He turned away from it and walked toward the conference room at the end of the hall. He didn't make it 10 steps before Sally Samford appeared from a side office and stopped dead when she saw him. The professional mask cracked, just for a second, and underneath it was something that looked a lot like panic. "Mr. Barsh." She moved toward him with her hands out slightly, like she was trying to slow down a situation that was already in motion. "You can't just… This floor is restricted." Emiliano stopped walking. He opened his leather folder and held up his contract. All 30 years of it, every page intact, worn at the edges, but completely, undeniably real. "I have a legal appointment," he said. His voice was even, not loud, not angry, just clear, the way the sky is clear before a storm decides to arrive. "I've honored every line of this contract for 30 years. I'd like 5 minutes." Sally opened her mouth. A door swung open down the hall. Dex Headland stepped out mid-sentence, talking back over his shoulder to someone in the room behind him. And then he turned, and he saw Emiliano standing in the hallway with his contract in his hand. And every word he'd been saying just stopped. He went pale. Not embarrassed. Pale. Pale like a man who has just understood the full weight of a mistake that he didn't make, but also did nothing to prevent. "Mr. Barsh." His voice came out low. "Careful." Like he was handling something that could break. Or explode. He wasn't sure which. "Hello, Dex," Emiliano said. They looked at each other for a moment. Dex had been VP of Supply Chain for 11 years. He had reviewed the Barsh contract every single renewal cycle. He knew the numbers better than anyone in the building. He knew exactly who was standing in that hallway. And he knew exactly what it meant that this man had been sitting in the lobby since 10 o'clock in the morning. Dex stepped back and held the conference room door open. "Come in," he said. "Please." Emiliano walked past him into the room. Dex shut the door and stood with his back against it. And through the glass wall he could already see Garvey Williard coming down the hallway. Long strides, sharp expression, wanting to know what the disturbance was on his floor. Garvey Williard opened the conference room door like he owned it, which he did. That was the thing about men like Garvey. They owned every room they walked into, or at least they moved like they did, which amounted to the same thing. He came in with his shoulders back, and his jaw set, and his eyes already scanning for whatever minor problem had pulled him away from his afternoon. His eyes landed on Emiliano. They stayed there for a moment, taking in the overalls, the flannel shirt, the straw hat, the worn leather folder sitting on the conference table. The hands, big, calloused, the hands of a man who had spent decades pulling something real out of the earth. Garvey's expression didn't shift into anger or surprise. It shifted into something worse. Dismissal. Complete and total dismissal. The kind that doesn't even bother to hide itself. "Who is this?" he asked. He said it to Dex, not to Emiliano. Like Emiliano was a piece of furniture that had shown up in the wrong room, and someone needed to explain how it got there. Dex straightened. "This is Emiliano Barsh," he said carefully, "of Barsh Heritage Farms." Garvey waited. The name meant nothing to him. "He had a 10 o'clock appointment," Dex continued. "Contract renewal meeting, scheduled by your office." He paused. "He's been in the lobby since then." Garvey glanced at his watch like the time was the interesting part of that sentence. "I don't handle vendor meetings personally, Dex. That's what procurement is." "Sir." Dex cut him off, quietly, but he cut him off. He opened his laptop, pulled up a report, and turned the screen around so it faced Garvey. It was the Supply Chain Dependency Report, the one that Dex looked at every quarter and felt a specific kind of anxiety about, the one that had a single line near the top, highlighted in red, that read, "Barsh Heritage Farms, Primary Supplier, Heritage Grain Blend, 30-year cumulative contract value, $298,400,000. Garvey leaned forward slightly. His eyes moved across the screen. Dex kept talking. His voice was flat and precise, like a man reading from a document he wished someone else had written. Barsh grain is in 62% of our product line. It's in all 4 of our top-selling SKUs. It is the single ingredient that makes our all-natural heritage branding legally defensible. His seed stock is proprietary. There is no qualified substitute currently in our supply chain. He paused. If we lose this contract, we are looking at a 90-day crisis minimum. Alternative sourcing would cost 40% more and would not meet our current brand certifications. The impact to our heritage product line alone is projected at $180 million annually. Our Q3 projections collapse. Our stock takes a hit we have not seen since 2009. The room was completely silent. Garvey stared at the screen. The numbers sat there in red. $298,400,000, quiet and immovable, the way the truth tends to be when it finally runs out of patience. Then he looked up. He looked at Emiliano. Really looked at him this time. The overalls, the straw hat, the calloused hands resting on the conference table, the worn leather folder. The man who had driven 3.5 hours that morning, checked in at the front desk before 10 o'clock, sat in that lobby for 4 hours without making a scene, without raising his voice, without doing anything except waiting with more dignity than anyone in this building deserved. Emiliano looked back at him. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who had known this moment was coming since 11:45 in the morning, when Garvey had glanced at him through the lobby glass and kept walking without breaking his smile. He had simply waited for the moment to arrive on its own schedule. He was good at waiting. The silence stretched out between them, long enough to be uncomfortable, long enough for Garvey to feel the full weight of what was sitting in that red number on the screen. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, Helena Vangriff had followed the commotion to the 32nd floor. She stood in the hallway with her notebook open, close enough to see everything through the glass. Her pen was moving. Garvey straightened up. He cleared his throat. He did what men like him always do when they've been caught. He reached for control. "Well," he said, adjusting his cuffs, "let's talk about getting this contract sorted out." Emiliano nodded slowly. "That's exactly why I drove 3.5 hours this morning," he said. Garvey moved fast once he decided to move. He straightened his jacket, pulled out a chair at the head of the conference table, and sat down like the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. Like the number on Dex's screen hadn't just rearranged the power in the room. He snapped his fingers once, a small, sharp gesture toward Sally, who was still hovering near the door, and she disappeared into the hallway. She came back 2 minutes later with a folder. Clean, crisp, professionally bound. She set it on the table in front of Emiliano without making eye contact and stepped back. "Our legal team has been working on updated terms," Garvey said. His voice had shifted. Smoother now. Business mode. The contempt was still there. Emiliano could feel it. But it was dressed up in corporate language, the way a bad deal gets dressed up in fine print. "We think you'll find it's a very competitive package given current market conditions." Emiliano looked at the folder. He didn't open it right away. "Current market conditions," he repeated. "Agriculture pricing has shifted significantly over the past few years," Garvey said. "Input costs, logistics, inflation. Our margins have taken a real hit across the board. We've had to renegotiate terms with all our suppliers. This isn't personal. It's just good business." Emiliano nodded slowly. Then he opened the folder. He read it the way he did everything, without rushing. Page by page, clause by clause, the way his father had taught him. "Don't let anybody rush you through a contract, son. The devil lives in the parts people want you to skip." The room was quiet while he read. Garvey checked his phone twice. Dex stood near the window and looked at the floor. Emiliano turned the last page. He closed the folder. The new terms cut his price per bushel by 22%. extended Nutricor's right to cancel the agreement to 90 days' notice, cut Emiliano's own cancellation window down to 15 days, meaning Nutricor could walk away from him with 3 months of breathing room, but if Emiliano ever needed to walk away, for any reason, he had 2 weeks. It wasn't a contract. It was a trap with a signature line. "I won't be signing this today," Emiliano said. The temperature in the room dropped. Garvey set his phone down. "Mr. Barsh, this cuts my rate by 22%, Emiliano said. His voice was still calm, still even. "After 30 years of on-time delivery, after 30 years of never once shorting you on volume or quality, you want me to take 22% less and give up my right to proper notice." He tapped the folder once with one finger. "That's not a competitive package. That's a punishment for showing up." Something moved behind Garvey's eyes, a flash of something hot and ugly that he almost managed to keep contained. "You don't really have a lot of room to negotiate here," Garvey said. His voice had dropped the smooth business tone now. What was underneath it was harder. "We're your biggest account by a significant margin. Without this contract, what exactly are you planning to do with your harvest?" "I'll figure something out," Emiliano said. Garvey leaned forward. "I don't think you understand the position you're in. You're one farmer. We are a Fortune 500 company, with a legal team, a procurement department, and options you don't know about yet." He let that sit for a second. Then, "Take the new rate, Mr. Barsh, or we find someone else. Simple as that." The words landed in the room like something heavy dropped on a hardwood floor. Dex closed his eyes briefly. Out in the hallway, through the glass wall, Helena Van Griff's pen stopped moving, then started again, faster. Emiliano looked at Garvey for a long moment. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't do anything except stand up, pick up his own worn leather folder, the one with the real contract in it, 30 years of kept promises, and reach for his straw hat. "Good luck with that," he said. He walked out. The elevator ride down was quiet. Emiliano stood with his folder under his arm and his hat in his hands, and he breathed slowly, the way he breathed when a storm was coming in over the fields and there was nothing to do but let it come. His phone buzzed. A message from Tamara. "Dad, just got off the phone with Meridian Foods. They're serious. 340 Malters over 10 years. Your call." Emiliano read it once, then again. Then he typed back, "Set up the meeting." He rode the rest of the way down in silence, walked through the marble lobby, past the waterfall that sounded like constant quiet money, and out through the glass doors into the Atlanta afternoon. He drove 3.5 hours home to Trenton. He ate dinner. He went to bed. He slept without difficulty. 3 days passed. Emiliano rose before the sun each morning, walked his fields, checked the grain, and went about the work of running a farm that had been in his family for over 60 years. The stalks were healthy. The soil was doing what good soil does when you take care of it, giving back exactly what you put in. He did not call Nutricor. Nutricor did not call him. On the morning of the 3rd day, a standard email landed in his inbox from Nutricor's procurement department. No personal greeting, no acknowledgement of what had happened in that conference room, no apology for 4 hours in a lobby. Just a form message with a PDF attachment, the same predatory contract in a cleaner envelope, and a line at the bottom that read, "Please review and return signed at your earliest convenience." Emiliano read it once, closed his laptop, and went back outside. In Atlanta, the 32nd floor of Nutricor headquarters was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes before things start breaking. Garvey Williard sat in his corner office on the morning of day 3 and told Dex Headland, with the particular confidence of a man who had never genuinely been told no, that Emiliano Barsh would come around. "They always do," he said, spinning a pen between two fingers. "He's a farmer with one major account. He's not walking away from this. Give it a week." Dex nodded. He said nothing about the fact that Meridian Foods was one of 3 companies that had been quietly trying to get a meeting with Barsh Heritage Farms for the better part of 2 years. He said nothing about the fact that Emiliano's heritage grain certification was essentially irreplaceable. He said nothing because saying something would have required a kind of courage that Garvey had spent 11 years training out of him. He walked back to his office and stared at his supply chain report and felt sick. Meanwhile, Helena Vangriff was not being quiet at all. She had been back at her desk at Agrimarket Weekly since the day after the confrontation, working her sources like a woman with a deadline and a conscience. She obtained Nutricor's lobby sign-in log through a contact inside the procurement department. A young woman who had watched Emiliano sit in that lobby and hadn't been able to stop thinking about it since. The log showed Emiliano's arrival timestamp at 9:58 a.m. It showed Sally Samford's dismissal attempt logged at 2:07 p.m., 4 hours and 9 minutes. Then Helena pulled Garvey's public-facing executive calendar for that day. She cross-referenced every listed meeting against the timestamps. From 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock. Garvey's calendar showed a block marked simply, discretionary. Not a critical investor meeting. Not an emergency session. Discretionary. A word that means whatever the man who owns the calendar decides it means. He had not been unavailable. He had simply chosen not to come down. Helena also tracked down Calvin Spraggs, who agreed to give a sworn written statement. Calvin described in plain, careful language exactly what he had witnessed, including the moment at 11:45 a.m. when Garvey Williard had walked through the lobby with his investor group, looked directly at Emiliano Barsh sitting in the leather sofa with his folder on his knee and his straw hat in his hand, and kept walking without pausing for even 1 second. Calvin signed his name to every word of it. Helena published her first piece on a Thursday morning. She kept the names out of it, for now, but everything else was in there. The headline read, "Black Legacy Farmer Left, Waiting in Fortune 500 Lobby. While CEO wines and dines investors, is this how Big Food treats its most critical suppliers?" By noon, it had spread through every major agricultural industry newsletter and trade forum in the country. By evening, it had jumped beyond those circles entirely. Civil rights organizations began making calls. Social media lit up with people who recognized the story immediately. Not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. Nutricor's stock dipped 2% by market close. Garvey's PR team called it a blip. His communications director drafted a holding statement. Garvey reviewed it, approved it, and told his team the story would die in a week. He poured himself a drink and went home. Rupert Owen read Helena's article over breakfast on Friday morning at his home in Buckhead. He was 74 years old, and he had been in business long enough to know the difference between a story that dies and a story that grows. He set the paper down. He picked up his phone and called Garvey's office. Garvey was unavailable. Rupert called Dex instead. Dex answered on the first ring. His voice was steady. His hands were not. The cease and desist arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a large white envelope with Nutricor's legal department return address printed in the corner. Clean, official, the kind of envelope designed to make you feel small before you even open it. It was addressed to Barsh Heritage Farms. There was a second identical envelope addressed to Meridian Foods, sent simultaneously. Emiliano found it in his mailbox at the end of the dirt road, between a seed catalog and an electric bill. He carried it back up to the house, sat down on the porch, and opened it. He read it slowly. All 6 pages. The letter claimed that a clause in the original 1994 contract, a first right of refusal amendment, required Emiliano to offer Nutricor the opportunity to match any competing supply agreement before he signed with another buyer. It claimed that Emiliano's ongoing discussions with Meridian Foods constituted a direct violation of this clause. It demanded that all negotiations with Meridian cease immediately. It carried the signature of a senior partner at one of Atlanta's largest corporate law firms, and it was written in the kind of dense, aggressive legal language designed to make a man feel like the walls were already closing in. Emiliano read it twice. Then he went inside and called Tamara. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay? I need you to look at something," he said. "I'm going to take a picture and send it to you right now." He heard her shift, the sound of her moving from wherever she was to somewhere she could focus. "Okay, send it." He photographed all 6 pages and sent them. Then he sat at the kitchen table and waited, listening to the quiet of the house around him, the clock on the wall, the sound of the fields outside the window. 4 minutes passed. Then Tamara laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the short, sharp laugh of a corporate attorney who has just watched the other side make the kind of mistake that changes the direction of a fight. "Dad," she said, "tell me, this first right of refusal clause they're citing, it was in the 1994 amendment." "That's true." He could hear her pulling up documents on her end. "But it was explicitly removed in the 2009 contract renewal. Nutricor's own legal team requested its removal. They didn't want the reciprocal obligations it created on their end. Because that clause didn't just bind you, it bound them too. They killed it themselves 17 years ago." She paused. "The clause they are threatening you with does not exist in the governing contract. It hasn't existed for 17 years. Emiliano sat with that for a moment. "So what does that mean?" he asked. Though he already had a sense. "It means one of 2 things," Tamara said. "Either their legal team is so sloppy that they cited a superseded amendment without checking the renewal history, which would be stunning incompetence for a firm of this size, or they knew exactly what they were doing and sent this letter anyway, hoping you wouldn't know the difference." She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice had an edge to it that Emiliano recognized, the same edge she'd had since she was 12 years old and figured out that the world wasn't always fair, and decided she was going to do something about it. "Either way, Dad, this letter is written evidence that Nutricor is actively trying to interfere with your legal right to conduct business with another company. That is tortious interference. That is not a scare tactic. That is a legal gift." Emiliano looked at the 6 pages spread out on his kitchen table. He thought about the 30 years of harvests those pages were trying to weaponize against him. He thought about his father sitting at this same table in 1994, spreading out that original contract with honest hands and a belief that a deal made in good faith would be honored in good faith. He thought about Garvey Williard adjusting his cuffs and saying, "Take the new rate or we find someone else," like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What do we do?" Emiliano asked. "We document everything," Tamara said. "We keep every piece of paper they send us. We keep every email. And we let Meridian's legal team know what's happening, so they understand exactly what kind of company they're dealing with." She took a breath. "And Dad, don't sign anything. Don't respond to this letter. Not yet. Let me handle it." "All right," Emiliano said. He gathered the 6 pages together, tapped them neat against the table, and set them in a clean stack beside his original contract. Then he got up, poured himself a glass of sweet tea, and walked back outside to check on the grain. The fields were still healthy. The sun was still up. Some things, at least, stayed exactly as they should be. The story ran on a Wednesday morning. This time, Helena Van Griff used names. The headline stretched across the top of Agri-Market Weekly's website in bold black letters. Nutricor CEO left 300M Supplier, a 68-year-old black farmer, waiting in lobby for 4 hours, then threatened him with a bogus legal letter. Below it was everything, not suggestions, not implications, evidence. The lobby sign-in log showing Emiliano's arrival at 9:58 a.m. and Sally Samford's dismissal attempt at 2:07 p.m. Garvey Williard's public calendar showing a discretionary, unscheduled window from 11 to 1. Proof that he had not been in a critical meeting while Emiliano sat downstairs. Calvin Spragg's sworn written statement, quoted directly, describing in plain language the moment Garvey had looked at Emiliano through the lobby glass at 11:45 a.m. and kept walking without a second glance. And then the photograph. A still image pulled from the lobby security camera, obtained by Helena through her source in procurement, showing Garvey mid-laugh with his investor group, and visible in the background, seated on the leather sofa with his folder on his knee and his straw hat in his hand, Emiliano Barsh. The image was not dramatic. That was what made it devastating. It was just a man sitting and waiting, while another man laughed and walked past him. It was the most ordinary kind of injustice, the kind that happens every single day in lobbies and boardrooms and waiting rooms all across the country. The kind that most people never see because there is no photograph. This time, there was a photograph. By 9 o'clock that morning, the article had been shared 10,000 times. By noon, it had crossed out of agricultural industry circles entirely and was running on general news feeds, business blogs, and social media platforms where people who had never heard of Agri-Market Weekly were reading every word and feeling something hot and familiar rising in their chests. 3 major civil rights organizations issued public statements before the end of the business day. 2 of them called for a formal investigation into Nutricor's supplier practices. One of them named Garvey Williard directly. The comments sections were not polite. Nutricor's communications director earned her salary that afternoon. By 3 o'clock, the company released an official statement describing the article as a significant mischaracterization of routine scheduling challenges, and assuring the public that Nutricor had the highest respect for all supplier partners and was committed to reaching an equitable and mutually beneficial resolution. The statement was careful and bloodless and said absolutely nothing. Wall Street read the statement and partially steadied. Nutricor's stock, which had dropped 4% in 2 days, clawed back 1.5 points by closing bell. Garvey told his team the worst was over. He said it with conviction. He even believed it a little. In his corner office on the 32nd floor, with the Atlanta skyline behind him and a fresh coffee on his desk, Garvey Williard looked at the stock recovery number and decided that the story had reached its peak and would now begin to fade. Stories always faded. People had short attention spans and long to-do lists, and in 2 weeks, something else would be outrageous, and Nutricor would go back to being a company that sold grain-based food products in attractive packaging. He approved a second statement for the following morning, slightly warmer in tone, and went home feeling like a man who had navigated something difficult and come out the other side. He did not know about the audio recording. He did not know that Sally Samford had been quietly building a file for 9 days. He did not know that in Trenton, Georgia, Tamara Barsh Wires was sitting at her father's kitchen table with a laptop open and a legal pad covered in notes, working through Nutricor's TRO, filing line by line, looking for the thing she suspected was there. And he did not know that 70 miles away in Buckhead, Rupert Owen had read Helena's full article 3 times, had looked at the lobby photograph for a long time, had read Calvin Spragg's sworn statement, word by word, had set the paper down on his desk beside his cold morning coffee, and sat in his study with the particular stillness of a man who built something over 50 years and is beginning to understand that someone else has been slowly burning it down. Rupert picked up his phone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it back down. He wasn't ready to make the call yet. But the call was coming. Some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. And Rupert Owen had seen enough. The restraining order arrived on a Thursday. Not in Emiliano's mailbox this time. It came through Tamara's legal email at 4:47 in the afternoon. A formal court filing, stamped and signed, issued by a Georgia civil court judge. Nutricor's legal team had moved fast, and they had moved quietly. And by the time Tamara saw it, the order was already in effect. She read it standing at her kitchen counter in Atlanta, still in her work clothes, her car keys on the counter beside her untouched. The filing claimed that Emiliano's ongoing negotiations with Meridian Foods constituted a potential breach of the first right of refusal clause, the same clause that didn't exist in the governing contract, the same clause that had been removed in 2009 at Nutricor's own request. It asked the court to prohibit Emiliano from entering any competing supply agreement while the dispute was adjudicated. It was dressed up in careful legal language that made a dead clause sound alive and a legitimate business negotiation sound like a crime. The judge had granted it within 48 hours. Tamara called Meridian's legal team before she called her father. Meridian's response was exactly what she feared. They were interested in Emiliano. They believed in the deal. But they were a publicly traded company with shareholders and a board of their own, and absorbing an active litigation risk on a supply agreement that wasn't even signed yet was not something they were prepared to do. They were pausing negotiations immediately until the legal situation was resolved. Then Tamara called her father. Emiliano listened without interrupting. He had that quality, the ability to absorb difficult news without letting it knock him off his feet right away. He took it in the way he took bad weather. He let it land, assessed the damage, and then figured out what came next. When Tamara finished, there was a pause on the line. "So, Meridian's out," he said. "For now," Tamara said. "It's temporary, Dad. This order has problems, serious problems. I'm filing an emergency motion to vacate first thing tomorrow morning. The conflict of interest I found in their filing is real, and it is significant. And if the motion doesn't work?" She hesitated, just for a second. "Then we go to the appellate court." Emiliano did the math without saying it out loud. His current contract expired in 47 days. His grain was in the ground and nearly ready for harvest. Commercial grain storage at his volume was expensive and time-limited. If he had no buyer when the harvest came in, he couldn't hold it indefinitely. The crop would deteriorate. 47 years of his family's work, his grandfather's soil, his father's seed stock, his own 3 decades of perfecting the yield, rotting in storage, while lawyers argued over a clause that didn't legally exist. That evening, Tamara drove down from Atlanta. She didn't call ahead. She just came. She pulled up the dirt road as the sun was getting low and orange over the grain fields, and Emiliano was already on the porch like he'd been expecting her, because he knew his daughter, and he knew she didn't let her father sit alone with something heavy if she could help it. They sat together as the light faded. The fields were gold in the evening sun. The grain moved in a slow, easy wave in the breeze, healthy, full, almost ready. It was beautiful in the way that something is beautiful when you understand exactly what it cost. Tamara laid it out plainly. Garvey was trying to trap him in a box, contract expiring on one side, Meridian frozen out on the other, the harvest clock ticking in the middle. Sign the predatory renewal or watch the crop die. That was the play. That was what the restraining order was actually for. Emiliano listened to all of it. He looked at his fields for a long time. "He thinks I've got nowhere to go," Emiliano said. He's trying to make sure of it, Tamara said. Another silence. The breeze moved through the grain. I'm 68 years old, baby girl, Emiliano said quietly. I've been afraid plenty of times. It never stopped the sun from coming up. Tamara looked at her father, at the lines in his face and the steadiness in his eyes, and the way he sat in his chair like a man who had been rooted in the same ground for so long that nothing could move him. And she felt something loosen slightly in her chest. She reached over and took his hand. They sat together as the last of the light left the sky. Neither of them spoke again for a long time, and the grain moved in the dark like it was breathing. Garvey called Dex into his office on a Monday morning and closed the door. That was never a good sign. Garvey was a man who liked open doors, liked the visibility, liked the sense of an executive floor humming under his direction. When he closed the door, it meant the conversation happening inside it was one he didn't want traveling down the hallway. He sat behind his desk and folded his hands and looked at Dex the way a man looks at a tool he needs to work correctly. The board is getting nervous, Garvey said. Rupert has been making calls. I need something on paper that tells them the supply chain situation is handled. Something clean. Something that says we are not dependent on one farmer in Georgia to keep our product line running. Dex stood in front of the desk. He had been VP of supply chain for 11 years. He knew the supply chain the way Emiliano knew his fields. Every connection, every dependency, every vulnerability. He knew that the all-natural heritage brand certification was tied directly to Barsh's proprietary seed stock. He knew that not a single alternative supplier had been qualified or even formally approached. He knew that the transition Garvey was describing, a smooth, managed handoff to new sources, did not exist anywhere except in the version of reality that Garvey preferred to inhabit. I need it by end of day, Garvey said. Dex nodded. He went back to his office and sat at his desk for 20 minutes without moving. Then he opened a new document and started typing. The memo described the supply chain situation as actively transitioning. It stated that alternative grain suppliers were currently being evaluated and onboarded. It used the phrase operationally mitigated twice. It projected confidence and competence and forward momentum. Every sentence was polished and professional. Almost none of it was true. Dex read it back once. He felt the particular nausea of a man who has just done something he knows is wrong and has already decided he is going to do it anyway. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself Garvey would sort it out. He told himself that his mortgage and his kids' college funds and his 11 years of tenure were real things that existed in the real world, and that sometimes real things required difficult choices. He hit send. The memo landed in Rupert Owen's inbox that afternoon. Rupert read it carefully, the way he read everything. He was 74 years old, and he had built businesses from the ground up, and he knew the difference between a memo that reported reality and a memo that was performing reality. But the language was careful. The projections were specific enough to sound credible, and he wanted it to be true. That was the thing. He wanted to believe that his company was not in the middle of something that was going to get much worse before it got better. He called Dex to confirm. Dex confirmed it. Verbally, calmly, looking at nothing while he talked. Rupert thanked him and hung up. Then he called Tamara Barsh Wires. He found her number through Nutricor's supplier contact records. He dialed it himself, didn't have his assistant do it, and when she picked up, he introduced himself and spoke to her with the careful courtesy of a man who was trying to do right by something he had already partially gotten wrong. He suggested, gently but unmistakably, that a pragmatic modified agreement might be the right path forward for Emiliano. He said he understood the situation had been handled poorly. He said he wanted a resolution that worked for everyone. Tamara was quiet for a moment when he finished. Then she said, "Mr. Owen, in the 4 hours my father sat in your lobby, not one executive came down to greet him. Your CEO looked at him through that glass at 11:45 in the morning and kept walking. And then your company sent him a legal letter citing a contract clause that hasn't existed for 17 years. Her voice was even, controlled, the way a sharp thing is controlled. Tell me honestly, would you be calling a white supplier with 30 years of perfect delivery and $300 million in business and asking him to be pragmatic right now?" The silence on Rupert's end lasted a long time. "I'll be in touch," he said finally. He hung up. He sat in his study with the memo on his desk, and Helena Van Griff's article beside it, and Calvin Sprague's sworn statement beneath that. The desk lamp made a small circle of yellow light in the dark room. Something was wrong. He could feel the shape of it now, the outline of something large and ugly that the memo was trying to cover up. He just didn't have all the pieces yet. That was 2 days away. Sally Samford arrived at the office at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning and sat at her desk for 20 minutes without opening a single file. She was good at her job, had always been good at her job. 12 years in executive support roles, the last 4 as chief of staff to Garvey Williard. And in that time she had managed his calendar and his correspondence and his image with the kind of precise, invisible competence that powerful men rely on and rarely acknowledge. She anticipated problems before they became problems. She smoothed things over. She made the difficult parts of running a company look easy. She was good at her job. She was also the person who had stood in the lobby of this building and told a 68-year-old man who had driven 3.5 hours that he should come back in 6 to 8 weeks. She was the person who had gone back upstairs and deliberately not delivered his message to Garvey. She had made that choice in about 4 seconds and then moved on to the next item on her to-do list, like it was nothing. It had not been nothing. She had known who Emiliano Barsh was, not personally. She'd never met him before that day. But his name was in the supplier files she managed. She had processed correspondence related to his contract more than once. She had known, on some level, that the man sitting in that lobby in overalls with a worn leather folder was not a small vendor with a minor complaint. She had made a choice. And she had spent 19 days since making it, trying to convince herself it was just a professional decision in a difficult situation. She opened her desk drawer. Inside, in a plain manila folder, was everything. She had started the file 3 days after the lobby incident, quietly, on her own time, without telling anyone. The timestamps of Emiliano's check-in and her dismissal attempt. Printed copies of the internal emails she had fielded that morning. The ones from upstairs telling her to manage the lobby situation without escalating to Garvey. Her own written account of the conference room confrontation, drafted from memory that same evening while it was still sharp. And at the bottom of the folder, on her personal phone, an audio recording she had captured without planning to. Her phone had been on the table during the conference room confrontation, recording a voice memo for an unrelated meeting note she'd intended to take, and Garvey's voice was on it, clear and unmistakable. "You're a farmer. We're a Fortune 500 company. Take the new rate, or we find someone else." She had listened to it once the night she discovered it. Then she had locked her phone and not listened to it again. Until this morning. She played it one more time, sitting at her desk at 7:49 a.m., with the office still mostly empty around her. Then she opened a secure personal email account she had set up from her home laptop the week before. Not her work email, not anything that ran through NutriCore's servers, and she attached every document in the folder. The timestamps, the internal emails, her written account. A typed summary of everything she had witnessed and everything she had chosen not to do. She typed Tamara Barshwire's name in the address line. She had found Tamara's professional contact through a legal directory 2 days ago and had been staring at it ever since. She hit send before she could change her mind. Then she opened her desk drawer one more time, took out her NutriCore Access badge, and set it on top of her keyboard. She wrote a one-line resignation letter on a plain piece of paper. No explanation, no 2 weeks' notice, no requests, and left it beside the badge. She picked up her personal belongings, which she had already packed into a small tote bag at home that morning before she left, and she walked to the elevator. She rode down to the parking garage and called Tamara from the concrete quiet of level 2. Tamara picked up on the first ring. "I just sent you a folder," Sally said. "Everything is in there. The timestamps, the emails, my written account, and an audio recording of Mr. Williard in the conference room." She paused. "I'm sorry it took me this long." Tamara was quiet for a moment. "Did you send it from a personal account?" "Yes." "Good. Don't delete anything on your end. Keep copies." Another pause, shorter. "Thank you, Miss Samford." Sally sat in her car for a long time after she hung up. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel redeemed. She felt like a person who had finally done the right thing about 19 days later than she should have. But the file was sent. And some things, once set in motion, do not stop moving. That same afternoon, Tamara made a discovery of her own. She had been working through NutriCore's restraining order filing line by line for 4 days, reading every footnote, every cited precedent, every signature on every page. And on page 11, she found a name. The senior attorney who had filed the TRO on NutriCore's behalf was a man named Roland Polston of Hargrove and Polston, LLP. Tamara pulled his professional history from the State Bar Directory as a matter of routine, and she found it. In 1991, Roland Polston, then a junior associate at a different firm, had represented Barsh Heritage Farms in a Georgia land boundary dispute. Emiliano's late father had been his client, which meant Polston had privileged access to Barsh Heritage Farms' legal history, financial records, and property documentation going back over 3 decades. He had taken NutriCore's case anyway. That was not a technicality. That was a disqualifying conflict of interest, and it meant that every filing Polston had submitted on NutriCore's behalf, including the restraining order that was currently freezing Emiliano's negotiations with Meridian, was legally compromised. Tamara picked up the phone and called the appellate court. Then she called her father. "Dad," she said, "it's about to move." Rupert Owen did not sleep well on Monday night. He lay in the dark of his bedroom in his Buckhead home and stared at the ceiling and turned things over in his mind the way he had been doing for the better part of a week. He was 74 years old. He had started his first business at 26 with borrowed money and a handshake deal, and he had built it, sold it, and built something else. And he had done that 4 times before he became chairman of the NutriCore board 15 years ago. He had seen companies make mistakes. He had seen executives get arrogant. He had seen short-term thinking destroy long-term value more times than he could count. He had never seen anything quite like this. He got up at 5:30, dressed without waking his wife, and drove himself to the office. No driver, no assistant call ahead. He parked in his reserved chairman's space in the underground garage at 6:47 a.m. and rode the elevator to the 32nd floor alone. The executive floor was empty at that hour. The overhead lights were on their motion sensors and clicked on in sections as he walked, a trail of light following him down the hallway like the building itself was paying attention. He passed Sally Samford's desk. It was clean. Badge on the keyboard. One piece of paper beside it. He stopped and read the paper. One line. He set it back down and kept walking. He stopped outside Dex Headland's office. The door was open. Dex wasn't in yet. It was barely 7, but his computer was in sleep mode and his desk was visible through the doorway. Rupert walked in and sat down in the chair across from Dex's desk. The chair a visitor would sit in. He put the board memo on the desk. Then he pulled a second document from the inside pocket of his jacket, the actual current supply chain status report, which he had obtained directly from Nutricor's procurement database the night before using his board access credentials, and placed it beside the memo. Then he waited. Dex arrived at 7:22. He came through the door with his coffee and his laptop bag and stopped when he saw Rupert sitting in his office in the dark. Because Rupert had not turned the office light on, he had sat in the gray early morning light coming through the window and waited. Dex's coffee cup moved slightly in his hand. Rupert reached over and turned on the desk lamp. Then he pointed at the two documents side by side on the desk. "Sit down, Dex," he said. Dex sat. Rupert tapped the board memo first. "You wrote this 11 days ago. You told me personally, on the phone, that this was an accurate picture of where we stood." Then he tapped the supply chain report. "This is the actual picture. 0 qualified alternative suppliers. 0 progress on heritage grain certification substitution. A projected brand impact of $180 million annually if the Barsh contract is not renewed." He looked at Dex across the desk. "Not a single thing in this memo reflects what is in this report." Dex opened his mouth. "Don't," Rupert said, quietly. That one word, spoken softly, landed harder than shouting. Dex closed his mouth. "You lied to this board," Rupert said. "You lied to me personally. And because of that lie, I made a phone call to Emiliano Barsh's daughter, asking her father to be reasonable. While her father was sitting on a farm, watching his harvest clock run down, because our legal team filed a restraining order using a contract clause that apparently hasn't existed since 2009. He paused. "I made that call based on what you told me. And I was wrong to make it, because what you told me was not true." Dex said nothing. There was nothing to say. Rupert stood. He picked up both documents and folded them into his jacket pocket. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. You will be there." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "And Dex, don't call Garvey tonight. Don't warn him. Don't send emails. Don't do anything except show up tomorrow and tell the truth for the first time in 3 weeks." He walked back down the hallway. The motion sensor lights clicked off behind him one by one. That evening, Tamara's emergency appellate filing landed with the court. At 8:14 p.m., the appellate court issued its ruling. The restraining order was vacated. Immediately and completely. The judicial notation attached to the ruling cited attorney misconduct. Roland Polston's disqualifying conflict of interest, confirmed by state bar records. The order had no legal foundation and should never have been granted. Tamara called Meridian Foods' legal team at 8:22 p.m. They answered on the first ring. She called Emiliano at 8:31. He was standing at the edge of his grain field in the last thin light of the evening when his phone rang. He listened to everything she said. The vacated order. Meridian back at the table. The board meeting in the morning. He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. He looked out at his fields, the grain dark and full in the evening, almost ready, waiting the way good things wait when they know their time is close. "Let's see it through," he said. Garvey Williard arrived at the boardroom at 9 o'clock with coffee in hand and confidence in his posture. He had been in difficult board meetings before. He knew how they worked. You walked in prepared, you controlled the narrative early, you acknowledged the problem in measured language, and you pivoted fast to your plan for resolution. You never let them see you sweat. You never gave ground before you had to. You managed the room the way you managed everything else, with certainty and forward momentum and the unspoken reminder that you were the one who understood the business well enough to run it. He took his seat at the head of the table. The other board members were already there. All 8 of them. Nobody was talking. That was the first thing Garvey noticed. The silence. Board meetings had a particular pre-meeting energy. People poured coffee and made small talk and complained about traffic. Today, there was none of that. 8 people sitting around a long table in complete quiet, looking at nothing in particular. Rupert Owen sat at the far end. Not the head, the far end, which was where the board chairman sat when he wanted to make clear that the head of the table meant nothing today. He had a laptop open in front of him. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Rupert said. He did not look at Garvey when he said it. "I'll get straight to it." He pressed play. The audio came through the boardroom speakers clearly and without distortion. The quality was good. The phone had been sitting on a conference table close to the voices, and every word was sharp. "You're a farmer. We're a Fortune 500 company. Take the new rate, or we find someone else." Garvey's voice. Unmistakable. The words sat in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody wrote anything down. Nobody cleared their throat or shifted in their chair. They just listened to those 2 sentences hang in the air of the boardroom like smoke that wasn't going anywhere. Garvey set his coffee down. "That's taken completely out of—" "I haven't asked you anything yet," Rupert said, still not looking at him. He turned the laptop to face the room and began moving through documents on the screen with the calm, methodical pace of a man who had prepared this presentation at 5 o'clock in the morning and was going to take his time with it. The lobby sign-in log. Emiliano's arrival at 9:58 a.m. Sally Samford's dismissal attempt logged at 2:07 p.m. Garvey's public calendar. The discretionary window from 11 to 1. Open, unscheduled, and entirely available during the 4 hours Emiliano had sat downstairs. Calvin Sprague's sworn written statement. Rupert read one section aloud, slowly. The part where Calvin described Garvey walking past Emiliano at 11:45 a.m. and looking at him the way you look at something that doesn't concern you. The lobby security camera still image. Garvey mid-laugh with his investor group. Emiliano visible in the background, sitting upright on the leather sofa, with his folder on his knee and his straw hat in his hand. The cease and desist letter. Rupert had the 2009 renewal document open beside it on the screen. The section showing the explicit removal of the first right of refusal clause highlighted in yellow. He said nothing about it. He just let the board look at both documents side by side. Dex Headland's board memo. Beside it, the actual supply chain status report. Also side by side. Also in silence. The appellate court's vacated restraining order with the judicial notation about Roland Polston's conflict of interest printed at the bottom. Rupert closed the laptop. The boardroom was so quiet that the air conditioning was the loudest thing in it. Garvey had tried to interject twice more during the presentation. Both times Rupert had continued speaking without acknowledging him, and both times the board had continued looking at the screen without turning toward Garvey. And after the second time, Garvey had stopped trying. Now Rupert looked at him directly for the first time since the meeting began. "Does anyone here believe this man should still be the face of this company?" he said. He addressed it to the room, but he was looking at Garvey. The silence lasted a long time. Long enough for Garvey to look around the table once, a quick scan, the involuntary movement of a man looking for an ally, and find nothing. No eye contact offered, no slight nod of support, nothing. Not even from Dex, who was sitting at the far corner of the table looking at his hands. The vote was 8-1. Garvey voted for himself. He was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending formal termination, before the coffee in his cup had gone cold. Dex Headland was terminated for cause before the meeting ended. His false memo was entered into the official termination record by name. Garvey sat at the head of the table while the board members gathered their things and filed out. He sat very still. His coffee was in front of him, and his hands were flat on the table. And he was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has just discovered that certainty is not the same thing as being right. Rupert was the last one to leave. He stopped at the door and looked back at Garvey once, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with the long, tired look of a man who has seen this kind of thing before and is exhausted by the fact that it keeps happening. Then he walked out and pulled the door quietly shut behind him. The press release went out at noon. It was 4 sentences long. It announced that Garvey Williard had stepped down from his position as CEO of Nutricor Foods, effective immediately, described the departure as a mutual decision reached following a period of reflection, thanked him for his years of service, and stated that the board of directors would be conducting a search for new leadership. It was the kind of statement that said everything and nothing at the same time, carefully worded, legally reviewed, designed to be as smooth and frictionless as possible. Helena Van Griff published the real version at 12:23 p.m. She had a source on the board. She had known the meeting was happening. She had the vote count, 8-1, and she had the audio recording, which Tamara had authorized her to publish in full. And she had a detailed account of every document Rupert had presented in that boardroom. Her headline read, Nutricor Board Osts, CEO 8-1, after audio recording surfaces of him telling Black Farmer, "You're a farmer, we're a Fortune 500 company." By 1 o'clock, the story was everywhere. Nutricor's stock, which had been trading down all morning on rumors of boardroom turbulence, jumped 6% within 40 minutes of Helena's story publishing. Markets had read the situation correctly. The supplier crisis could now be resolved, the liability was being addressed, and the company had demonstrated it was capable of holding its own leadership accountable. Investors like accountability. It means the adults are in charge. Garvey's corporate attorney called Tamara at 2 o'clock with a non-disclosure proposal, a number with several zeros, confidentiality requirements, a mutual release of all claims. The attorney's voice was smooth and professional and gave no indication of the urgency underneath it. Tamara listened to the full proposal without interrupting. Then she said, "No." The attorney began to explain the benefits of a negotiated resolution. "I heard you," Tamara said. "The answer is no. My father has nothing to be silent about. Neither do I." She hung up. Roland Polston's situation was moving through its own separate channel. The State Bar of Georgia had opened a formal disciplinary inquiry into his conduct, specifically his decision to represent Nutricor in a matter directly involving a former client whose privileged legal and financial history he had access to. The inquiry was not a slap on the wrist. Depending on its findings, Polston was looking at suspension or disbarment. His firm had already quietly removed his name from their website's featured partners page. 2 companies that had approached Garvey about CEO roles in the weeks before his termination both withdrew their interest within 24 hours of Helena's story. One of them released a brief statement saying they were committed to values-aligned leadership. The other said nothing publicly and just stopped returning his calls. Garvey retreated to his townhouse in Buckhead. His LinkedIn profile went quiet. On Thursday morning, 2 days after the board meeting, Rupert Owen got into his car alone. No driver, no assistant, no phone calls scheduled. He typed Trenton, Georgia into his navigation system and pulled out of his garage and drove south on the interstate as the morning was still gray and cool, the kind of early morning that belongs to people who have somewhere real to be. It took him 3.5 hours. He had made the same drive that Emiliano made, in reverse, and somewhere around the 2-hour mark, on a stretch of Georgia highway lined with pine trees and red clay fields, He thought about that. About a 68-year-old man making this drive at 6 in the morning, arriving before 10, sitting in a marble lobby with his worn leather folder, waiting with more dignity than anyone in that building had deserved. He pulled onto the dirt road that led to Barsh Heritage Farms just before 10 o'clock. He parked where the road widened slightly and got out of the car. The farm was quiet in the morning, the particular, productive quiet of land that is being well taken care of. The grain fields stretched out on both sides, full and golden, almost ready. The farmhouse sat at the end of the path, white-painted, solid, the kind of house that has been repaired and maintained and loved over many decades rather than built to impress anyone. Rupert walked the dirt path to the front door and knocked. Emiliano answered. He stood in the doorway in his overalls and looked at Rupert for a long moment, long enough that another man might have been uncomfortable. Rupert stood still and let himself be looked at. He figured he had earned that much discomfort, and considerably more besides. Then Emiliano stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee. A clock ticked on the wall. On the wall above the table hung photographs, 3 generations of Barsh men and women standing in front of these same fields, in different seasons, in different decades, connected by the same soil and the same work, and the same refusal to be moved by anything the world threw at them. Rupert sat down at the table. He looked at the photographs for a moment. Then he looked at Emiliano. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for last month. For 30 years of taking this for granted." Emiliano set a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. He pulled out the chair across the table and sat down. "I'm not in the business of grudges, Rupert," he said, "but I am in the business of fair." Rupert wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Outside the kitchen window, the grain fields caught the morning light and held it. Rupert reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a document. Not the predatory renewal that Garvey had drafted. Not the version with the 22% rate cut and the 15-day cancellation window and all that careful language designed to make a trap look like a contract. This was something different, thicker, cleaner, carrying the official Nutricor board seal at the top and Rupert's personal signature at the bottom of every page. He slid it across the kitchen table to Emiliano. Emiliano looked at it for a moment before he touched it. Then he picked it up and began to read. He read the way he always read. Every line, every clause, every number, without rushing. The kitchen was quiet around him. The clock ticked. Rupert drank his coffee and said nothing, and waited, because he understood by now that this was a man who would not be hurried through anything important, and that this document, this moment, this table, was about as important as things got. The new terms were on the first page. A 15-year supply agreement. A rate 31% above the previous contract. Not below. Above. A guaranteed minimum annual purchase volume written in hard numbers, protecting Emiliano from the kind of market fluctuation that had always been the quiet vulnerability of a farmer with one major account. A travel stipend, itemized and specific, for every scheduled executive meeting that required Emiliano to travel to Atlanta or anywhere else. And at the bottom of the first page, added in Rupert's own handwriting in blue ink. Not typed, handwritten, because some things need to be personal. A single line designating a permanent named product line. Barsh Legacy Blend. The name would appear on every Nutricor product containing Emiliano's grain. On the front of the packaging, in clean serif type, above the words Heritage Grain, grown since 1962. Not in the fine print. Not in the supplier acknowledgments on the back panel that nobody reads. On the front, where people would see it in grocery stores and reach for it off shelves and carry it home to their families. Emiliano's family name. On the product, his family's land had made possible for 30 years. He turned the pages slowly. He read the minimum volume guarantee twice. He checked the termination clause on both sides. 90 days mutual notice, equal for both parties, the way it should have always been. He read the brand designation language carefully, making sure it was binding and not just decorative. He closed the document. He sat with it in front of him on the table for a moment. Then he looked up at the wall above the kitchen table, at the photographs his family had taken over 60 years. His grandfather standing in the first field he cleared, squinting into the sun, hands on his hips, looking like a man who has just decided that this is the place and this is the work, and nothing is going to change that. His father at the kitchen table, this same table, with the original 1994 contract spread out in front of him, pen in hand, the beginning of everything that had led here. His daughter appeared in the doorway from the living room. She had driven down from Atlanta that morning and had been sitting in the next room pretending to look at her phone, which Emiliano knew and which she knew he knew. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and looked at her father and said nothing. Emiliano looked at her. He looked at the photographs. He picked up the pen that Rupert had set on the table beside the contract, and he signed his name on every page that needed it. Slow, clear, deliberate. The same signature that had been on every Barsh Heritage Farms document for 40 years. The same name that was now going on the front of a product that would sit in grocery stores across the country. He set the pen down. Rupert let out a long, quiet breath. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, Tamara sent her father a photograph from her phone. It was the first run of the new packaging, just off the printer, photographed by someone at the Nutricor plant, and forwarded through several hands before it reached her. A clean, well-designed label, golden grain in the background, and across the front, in strong serif type, Barsh Legacy Blend, heritage grain, grown since 1962. Emiliano was standing at the edge of his field when the photo came through. The harvest was in. The grain was gone from the stalks now, delivered, accounted for, every bushel. The fields were quiet the way they get after a harvest. Not empty, just resting, gathering themselves for what comes next. He looked at the photograph for a long time. He took off his straw hat and held it against his chest. The same hat he had held in that lobby for 4 hours, while a man in a navy suit walked past him laughing and kept going. He looked at his family's name on that label, and he thought about his grandfather clearing this land. He thought about his father at this kitchen table with a pen in his hand and faith in a handshake. He thought about 30 years of harvests, 30 years of deliveries, 30 years of doing exactly what he said he would do. He put his hat back on. The morning sun was coming up full and clean over the fields. The same sun that had come up every single morning of his life, through every hard season, through every year that tried to take something from him, faithful and indifferent, and entirely reliable. There was work to do. He walked back toward the farmhouse to start it. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.